Welcome along. This is a story that is gathering a lot of momentum and shows no signs of going away. Should Keir Starmer be investigated by the police for allegedly breaking lockdown rules? If there is a police investigation, that he should also promise to resign if he's found to have broken the rules, shouldn't he? Keir Starmer has an unbelievably thin skin, and today you can tell that the revelations that a voice coach and an actress visited him at Labour HQ on Christmas Eve, when London was in Tier 4 lockdown, have rattled him. He was also asked about it at a NATO summit, and he appears to be absolutely fuming.
Front. Thank you very much.
All right, that's all we have time for. Thank you.
Of course not.
Was your voice coach definitely a key word? Earlier today, it emerged that Leonie Mellinger, who went to coach Starmer how to respond to Boris's Brexit deal, actually turned up at Labour HQ on Christmas Eve. Shall we have a little look at what the rules were at the time? OK? In Tier 4, the stay-at-home message was put into law. As previously, there were some exemptions, including travelling for work or education, for childcare purposes and for exercise. But people should not enter or leave Tier 4 areas. And Tier 4 residents must not stay overnight or work from home. Now, this is something that's landed in the last 6 minutes on social media. I'm going to read this to you, all right? Keir Starmer's voice coach travelled between Tier 4 London on Christmas Eve 2020 before heading to Brighton, which was in Tier 3. The Tier 4 rules stated at the time that residents in Tiers 1 to 3 should not enter Tier 4. So that appears to be a flagrant breach of the rules. It appears to be a flagrant breach of the rules brought on by the now Prime Minister himself for wanting that woman in his office. OK? It also said that where people cannot work from home, they should still travel to work, for example, in the construction and manufacturing sectors, which she was not in. And the exceptions were for key workers. Well, the guidance at the time set out that the key workers belong to local and national government. This only includes those administrative occupations essential to the effective delivery of the COVID-19 response. Essential public services, such as the payment of benefits, including in government agencies and arm's-length bodies. Do you think that includes a voice coach for a really dull politician? No. It can't, can it? Because they weren't key workers, were they? No. At least not according to the government's official list of jobs, even though Keir Starmer insists that she was. Note that bit as well. Where people cannot work from home, they can travel to work. So why couldn't the voice coach and actress have just done it over Zoom? She obviously could have done. In fact, everyone else was. And you know why? Because she rather helpfully tweeted a picture of an empty train carriage, didn't she? There we go. That was on Christmas Eve. Well, there was nobody on that train, was there? Because very few people were allowed to be. There is no way she was genuinely a key worker, in my opinion. Keir Starmer has several problems here. Earlier today, his official spokesman didn't defend the scandal, but they have denied any wrongdoing took place. Instead, they just said they won't talk about things before the election. Well, that's convenient, isn't it? That makes it look like there is something to hide. Here is Keir Starmer, just a few days before that meeting with his voice coach, calling for harder, tougher, stricter lockdown measures.
Easing the restrictions, I think, is going to be the next big mistake for the Prime Minister. And he, rather than sort of saying, well, I'm not going to change the rules, it's over to you, families and communities, you take responsibility. That's not the act of a Prime Minister. The Prime Minister should say, I'll take the difficult decisions, not hand them over to individuals. We can see that the tiered system isn't working in the way the Prime Minister promised. More people are going into the higher tiers, so it's not strong enough.
No, it's not working, is it? Because actually, Mr Starmer, at that time, it does appear that a washed-up actress was travelling between Tier 3 and Tier 4 to come to your office. So it does appear that maybe the COVID restrictions weren't working that well, actually. Does that sound like a man who honestly thinks it's acceptable to invite an actress round for the evening? No, it doesn't, does it? And yet he appears to have done that. Starmer spent months hammering Boris, calling for him to resign.
He's finally been forced to admit what everyone knew, that when the whole country was locked down, he was hosting boozy parties in Downing Street. Yes. Is he now going to do the decent thing and resign?
Well, the problem now is that many people feel as though Keir Starmer was very lucky not to be at a party himself. Do you remember Beer and Korma Gate? Yeah, well, there's a bit of beer there, isn't there? And there's a bit of korma. And it's quite easy to conclude that maybe, actually, that's a party. But he promised that he'd resign if police found that he'd breached the rules. They decided that he hadn't. But what now about this voice coach? Why not promise the same thing, Sir Keir? Why don't you say, go on then, let's have the police investigate it, and if I'm found to have done anything wrong, then I'll resign. Do you know how it turns out? They probably know each other, by the way, him and this voice coach. He founded and ran an anti-death penalty charity with her husband, Anthony Burton. That's according to Guido Fawkes. I tell you what this looks like, Prime Minister. It looks like there was one rule for you and your lovey mates during COVID and one rule for everyone else. It looks like you wanted to lock us all up, ban us from seeing our grandparents, stop us from visiting dying relatives in hospital, but you could get some has-been actress at your beck and call whenever you wanted. Keir Starmer has developed a reputation with the public for not necessarily always sticking to his word, whether that's with pensioners, waspy women, farmers, securing the border, cutting your energy bills, reducing taxes, you name it. Do you not remember during COVID where he clearly tried to pass off Lord Ali's £80 million penthouse as his own home?
At times like this, we must all put the national interest first and play by the rules. Of course, I understand that sticking to the rules can be inconvenient.
So do you really believe him now? Do we really believe all the rules were followed? Do we believe him when he says this?
Front. Thank you very much.
All right, that's all we have time for. Thank you.
Of course not.
Was your voice coach definitely a key word? Of course not, he says. Of course not. There's only one way to find out. Let's get the police involved, Prime Minister. After all, we've had 2-tier Keir, now we've got tier 4 Keir, haven't we? And maybe the Prime Minister should ask for his money back from that voice coach after all.
I call again for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the sausages, the hostages.
Let's get the thoughts from our panel this evening. We've got journalist and broadcaster Carol Malone, we've got former Tory chairman Sir Jake Berry and trade unionist Andy Twelves. Carol, I will start with you. Should the police be knocking on our Prime Minister's door, do you think?
Of course, we can't forget, during this time, fathers were banned from watching their pregnant wives give birth. Kids were banned from seeing their dying mums and dads. People were separated at funerals, physically separated in crematoriums and churches so they wouldn't affect anybody. And here we have our Prime Minister letting someone in to his house. This makes the ordinary people of this country who made sacrifices and stuck to the rules feel stupid. And you said it before, that, is one rule for the elitists in this country and one rule for the rest of us. And to imagine that even though COVID is over now, people have forgotten the hardships of that time. People have forgotten that. They have not forgotten. It's why the hatred for Boris exists the way it does. We know Matt Hancock lost his job in the end because he broke the rules. Boris lost his job because he had a bit of cake. And Starmer, who pretends he's this ethical, this moral arbiter of everything, has broken the rules. That's what it very much looks like.
Let's just look at this. In the last few minutes, the Telegraph's Dominic Penner has exclusively revealed Sir Keir Starmer's voice coach travelled between COVID tiers in December 2020, OK? On Christmas Eve, but went home later that day. So she spent the Christmas break in Brighton. At that time, you were not allowed to travel between tier 4 and tier 3. And it appears that she did that. And it appears that she did that because Keir Starmer asked her to. Does he not have to quit over this?
I don't think it's a resigning matter, but I think it's probably quite stupid for him to deny any wrongdoing. It's the same thing as when we were discussing this 2 or 3 years ago with the Conservative government. Stop denying it, just say, yeah, we were in the wrong, and, they could probably move on without the media.
The two things to think about that. I mean, first of all, if he does admit it, he's admitting a criminal offence.
Sure.
So he's not, they've got this a bit wrong, he's admitting a criminal offence.
Can't be
and secondly...
You're a rule maker and a law breaker.
Correct. And secondly, he's clearly misled the House of Commons, which is what Boris was ultimately kicked out for, because he said repeatedly to the House of Commons. And let's cast our mind back, Patrick, because I think people forget far too quickly. This Christmas is the year that the government cancelled Christmas. Relatives weren't allowed to be with each other. If you lived in Tier 4 in London, you couldn't see your relatives. I remember cancelling my own Christmas celebration because we couldn't come together as a family because we were in different areas. This is to think that just a few hours before grandchildren would have been opening presents with their grandchildren that was cancelled by the government. Keir Starmer was just having acting lessons because it suited him.
Why?
It's just such a slap in the face to every GB News viewer and families who made the real sacrifice. It is a disgrace.
Go on, Carol. Go
I was just going to say, what Downing Street said tonight was even more shocking. They said, this happened while we were in opposition. Like that matters. Breaking a law is breaking a law. And you saw on that piece of film there, when he was asked a perfectly legitimate question by a journalist, what he said was, don't be ridiculous. Of course not. I mean, how supercilious can you be? Downing Street have all admitted it because they've said, it happened in opposition. So it happened in opposition.
Yeah.
And that doesn't matter. Is that, if you're in opposition, is that a go-ahead to break the law? No, of course it isn't. And that's what he should be.
It's also the idea, there's no way, I don't think, Annie, that this can be classed as an essential service. She had supposedly worked with him for the last couple of years, just aside from the fact that what it literally was, but also the idea that he's supposedly employed this woman for the best part of 2.5 years. He didn't need an urge. It wasn't like, I need this first ever acting lesson, a voice coach lesson right now. She could have done it over Zoom, couldn't she?
No, I completely... And I think any reasonable Labour supporter, any reasonable Labour voter would go, yeah, no, actually, she's definitely not a key worker. They probably did... They broke the law, probably, and they should just apologise and move on. I think most reasonable people would, looking at what the Tories did, looking at what a lot of normal people did break COVID rules.
Yes, they did,
I think
but
most people would go...
didn't.
But I think most people go...
But
if he just admitted it, most people would probably go, fair enough.
People broke COVID rules. And in fact, towards the end, and I'll just say this, I might get in trouble with this, I think you're an idiot if you didn't, because they were ridiculous. It was ridiculous, and the world had moved on. And we had this vaccine that was supposedly going to be the great white hope for the rest of society, and then it turned out, shock horror, even if you had about 4 doses, you could still get COVID, you could still pass it on.
Yeah,
and I think that was the point that most people... Just go back to the bloody office, will you? Yeah. But anyway, but Keir Starmer was one of the people... He
was the high priest of the new religion of COVID. And what really galls me about this is his office saying, we said she was a key worker. Well, you can't do that. It was set out in law. I voted on it in Parliament what constituted a key worker. You couldn't suddenly go, you know what, I need my nails done. I'll tell you what, today, I will designate the person who does my nails as a key worker. Yeah. It is a disgrace. And what really stinks about this is the rank hypocrisy of Keir Starmer. I've got an idea. Forget the police. Let's get Sue Gray back to investigate him. Oh, hold on. We can't. She's now a Labour member of the House of Lords. The person who swung the sword of Damocles at Boris Johnson, joined the Labour government, and then got sacked because she couldn't even hack the job.
But what does this tell you about a leader? That he has to have help, because this is what this voice coach actually said. He couldn't communicate with people. He was a bit wooden. Well, he was more than a bit wooden, and he still is. So
she'd ask for his money back.
She's failed. Exactly. She's failed miserably. She should take him off her CV. But what does it say about a leader, a supposed leader, that he needs to have help to communicate with people? Real leaders do that instinctively.
Lots of people do. Lots of people do.
Yes, I know Margaret Thatcher had it, but she had a political conviction, and she had a very distinct ideology. So she used Laurence Olivier actually to help her bring her voice down a bit so she could be more forceful. That worked for her, but he's had the voice lessons and they've done no good at all. But it's as Jake said, it's the rank hypocrisy of making ordinary people at home do these things, make sacrifices, watch while their relatives are dying and not being able to hold them or touch them, and he's away doing what he likes, having acting lessons.
I mean, I agree. I think most reasonable Labour supporters would go, yeah, you've done wrong, apologise and move on.
Broke the law.
But I think it is worth noting, when the Tories stick out their spin, when they're briefing, when they're sending out the spokespeople, in Cammy Badenoch's first interview as leader of the opposition, as Conservative leader, she said that Partygate had been massively overblown. So I would actually go on the hypocrisy point and go, I'd struggle to take any Conservative Party briefings seriously, because A, Partygate, and B, she went, it's all overblown anyway.
But how can Downing Street say they won't discuss it? How dare they say they won't discuss it? This is a legitimate concern. And if they're not discussing it, it looks like they've got something to hide.
In fairness, I don't run the Number 10 press office.
No. Yeah, not yet. But surely the real question here is, I understand all the stuff about whether he should have acting lessons during during COVID and all this. The real question here is, did the person who is now Prime Minister of the United Kingdom break the law? On these facts, it appears that he may have done.
And what's the precedent there?
That he resigned.
That he resigned.
That he resigned.
The president, he said he would.
And he said he'd resign if he was convicted. And there's no limitation on the period for which you can bring a criminal offence. So civil offences, there's a 6-year limitation. But a criminal offence, if you murder someone you found 20 years later, you still get tried for it. This should be investigated by the Met. And if he's found guilty, if he has any backbone whatsoever, he'll stick by what he said previously and go.
Because the other aspect is that today at that NATO summit, we've played the clip a couple of times. You know, he says categorically, he's quite very angry about even having to fend off the question. No rules were broken. So again, I'll stress that Keir Starmer's current position is that no rules were broken. Well, if it turns out, and I think most people would be scratching our heads now as to how can you say that now that we appear to know even more that she's travelled between tiers. Can I just preface this by saying a couple of things, right? I am like, I imagine most people watching or listening here, which is that I do not long for people to get knocks on the door from the police over breaking what, in my view, were utterly ridiculous COVID restrictions. But what I am saying is, I would be up for it for the bloke who was the one who was calling for everyone to be investigated for everything. Maybe you should deal with that. Keir Starmer, like I've said, denies any wrongdoing. We went to the Met Police, by the way, and we said to them, are you going to investigate? And they actually released quite a pithy statement back to us, which says, to be clear, the only way we can investigate someone is if someone reports it to the police.
So come on, Patrick, have you done it? Have you done it?
Well, I haven't done it. I haven't done it. Maybe someone
else should.
Right, OK, so moving on. We are